One thing you have to face a lot in programming and in life is making mistakes. And being able to recognize those mistakes and learn from them is crucial to any phase of life and programming. I want to cover some common errors and how to deal with them, and also how to recognize them, which I think is the most important in this video. The first error or common mistake I see a lot is referencing non-static variables from a static context. That's how it's officially called in Java. Let me show you guys an example here. Here I have a class called runner, and it has an instance variable of message, which is of type string. Now inside my main method, which is a static method required by Java, I'm simply printing out hello. Now if I wanted to print out the message string here, like I'm trying to do, I get a red outline, and that is an error. And the reason because I get that error is because message is an instance variable. So message only exists when I create an instance of this class. And that's what it means by non-static field cannot be referenced from a static context. That's pretty complicated, especially for a beginner. But what it essentially means is that you made message an instance variable. So to reference it or to look at message, you need to create an instance of the class that you're in. In this case, it's the runner class. So I would need to do runner slash run, we'll call it, and then make a new runner, just like we've done in the past. And then I can do run.message. Even though by default, my message is automatically set to be free, I must create an instance of that class by using the new keyword to be able to access that keyword. Now, if I were to make this variable static, like I said, then what would happen is I would not have an error because my instance can access static variables, but also I can access static variables without an instance. So that's an important distinction to note. If a variable is an instance variable, you can only access it from an instance, from a newly created object. But if it's not, if it's a static variable, you can access it from the instance or without the instance. Okay? Now, the next thing is the classic and probably most common error in Java, maybe tied for the most common, is the null pointer exception. Let me show you. Let's say I have this runner and we have it equal to run, and we can simply call the run method, which I have down below. I'm going to make this a little bit easier to read, so I'm going to call it runner. I'm going to change this variable to runner. So object's name is runner, and it's going to call it .run. And runner doesn't do anything, but it's just a method we made to call. And I can run this code, and I'll show you guys when I run it. Nothing happens, but the program just finishes elegantly, no errors. But what a null pointer exception is it's when you call a method or a variable on an object that doesn't represent anything. So when I call runner.run, runner is pointing to an object in memory that knows about all of its variables and methods, and it knows how to call them and how to access them. Well, null in Java is a special keyword that basically represents no location, or it represents an empty location. It means no object. And so that means I haven't initialized the runner object. And so in this case, Java isn't able to recognize this before I run the code because it's a runtime language. And so it's going to figure out when it actually executes the code if line 14 is null or not. And so when it sees that it's null, it's going to call the run method on a null object. So it's going to have no reference in memory to what to do with this run method because it won't have the location of the object. So when I run this code, I get an error, and it's in red, and that is the classic exception, null pointer exception. That means that you either haven't set one of your objects correctly, or one of your variables is null, and it will almost always tell you, as you can see here, it says at runner.main Java 14. So runner is the class you want to look into, and then the colon would be the line number. Another common mistake is the array out of bounds exception. It's when you go out of the bounds of an array. This could be either before the array starts or after the array ends. Either way, it would be an out of bounds, index out of bounds exception. Let me show you guys. So if I do int, we're going to make this an integer array, int brackets, and I'm going to call it array equals new int, and we're going to give it a size of 5. And simply, with our new array, we're going to then initialize it. I'm going to do int for loop, and I'm going to do int I classically equals 0. I is less than array dot length I plus plus. And I'll simply set each index of the array, which remember arrays start at 0. That's probably another common mistake. And I'll set it equal to I times I. So set it to I squared. Okay? And so then I'll go up here, and in our main method, we will actually call the .run method, but I will set my runner variable to a new runner. I will set it equal to an object so I don't get a null pointer error again, and I'll run this code, and it will all run very nicely. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're actually to cause our error. And maybe, just for kicks, I'll print out each number. And we'll do that now. I'll print out the array after we've facilitated it. So as you can see, we get 0, 1, 4, 9, and 16, just like we wanted. Now, if I wanted to do I is less than or equal to array.length, what would this do? This would go to position 0. As you look through it, I would be 0, you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it'd be 4 is less than or equal to array.length. What's the length? It's 5. So then when array length goes to 5, 5 is equal to the length of the array, 5. So then it will go one more time, and there's only 5 positions in the array, so it will be trying to fill a 6th position. So when I run this code, I'll get 0, 1, 4, 9, 16. The printout looks a little weird, but it's still the same thing. I get array index out of bounds exception 5. So that means I tried to go to index 5, and there was only index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that caused a major problem, and we went out of bounds here. Now, let's start I at -1 and see if we get a similar error here. So when I did I starts at -1 now, I got index out of bounds exception -1. So the error reported is when your index first goes out of bounds. So I started at -1, so I never even got to print out the rest of the array. That's a common error, array index out of bounds exception. Anything with the words exception, and it's usually in red in any development environment, exceptions are errors reported to you by Java. I will end this video with this last error, and that is simply forgetting the difference between 1 equal sign, which is for assignment, and 2 equal signs, which is for comparison. Right below my for loop, I have a integer assignment of the variable a equal to 5, and then I try to do an if statement that checks does a equal 10. Well, if I hover over that, I will get incompatible types. The if statement is expecting a Boolean, which would require a comparison statement, which we've gone over, but it found an integer because 10 was set to a with a single equal sign, and then a was displayed, and a is an integer. So to compare them, we simply use a double equal sign. And at the same time, don't use double equal signs to assign objects, to assign variables, not objects. Obviously, the compiler will catch that for you, but it's always good to note and, dot your I's and cross your T's. Everyone have a great